Are you ready to think big and act bold? Then you are in the right place. This is Innovative Entrepreneurs, a podcast that will bring you the stories, insights, and tips from some of the most successful and innovative entrepreneurs in the world. I am your host, Erica Bailey, and I am here to help you start, scale, and sustain your own entrepreneurial journey. Let's get started. Today, we have an exceptional guest with us. And I mean that. I did a lot of reading before he came on the show, so I'm really excited to have him here. He is a business creator and an exceptional software developer, known for helping people navigate the entrepreneurial landscape with precision and predictability. With over a decade of experience as a software executive at tech giants like Amazon and Microsoft, I don't know if you've ever heard of them, our guest, LaSean Smith, discovered invaluable patterns and processes that have become his secret weapons in the world of business. LaSean is the founder of CAGR Investments, a name that stands for Compound Annual Growth Rate. Don't know what that means.
We'll get into it.
He reminds us of the incredible power of compounding, not only in the financial returns, but also in our relationship and time. I'm actually excited to get on that one too. So today we are honored to have LaSean Smith as our guest, and he's here to share his blueprint for success, helping aspiring business owners avoid the pitfalls he has encountered along the way. We actually share something in common, which has to come up first because I bleed gold. We are both ASU alumni, and that just makes me happy. So
go Devils.
Forks up. Welcome, LaSean. How are you?
I'm fantastic. Great to hang out. How you doing?
You know what? I couldn't be any better. Life is good. Life is good. I'm grateful and I'm lucky. So thanks for coming on board. And I have a lot of questions to ask you.
Let's get into it.
What is compound annual growth rate? Or just give me some knowledge here.
Yeah. So first off, for any of the finance nerds that might be listening, they'll be very familiar with this term. It's pronounced, some folks call it CAGR, other folks call it CAGR. I use the latter, and then some folks just spell it out. But it's used so often in finance that they started kind of pronouncing the acronym, right? So there you go. But back in the 90s, early 2000s, it was kind of like a I don't know, kind of a Wall Street bro negative term, and I've kind of taken it back and given it some new life. But really, if you look at an investment thesis, if you look at stock growth, if you look at any coverage, how fast a certain category of business is growing, from bakeries to agriculture to whatever, typically they will normalize the growth using this particular measurement. And so you'll see something that might say companies that use AI, they're growing by 18% CAGR, right? And so what that's really trying to communicate is year over year, it's growing from its basis point plus, 18%. And the reason that's valuable is, as we know, compounding is not linear, it's exponential. And so I think it was Einstein who said, compound interest is one of the greatest inventions that humans have ever made. And it's so powerful because what you make in year 1 versus year 20 is such a drastic number difference, even if you're investing the same amount, because it keeps compounding on each other. And there's a great stat that Warren Buffett has made the majority of his money after he was 60 years old. And the reason that is true is because all of that money he had previously was compounding on each other. And so the reason I chose this name for the company, as you called out, it's not just the financial compounding. I really believe that a big part of entrepreneurial success is your ability to consistently show up and kind of move whatever the customer problem is day after day after day. And if you compound those improvements, where you'll end up is a much better place than if we dream for weeks or months and we're like, one day we're going to make it perfect. It'll never be perfect. We don't need to try. We just have to show up every day in a consistent manner. And when we do, we get that same exponential compounding that all the finance folks are already aware of.
Okay. Hager, got that one. This is actually quite interesting. All my financial stuff goes to my people. This is above my head, which is really sad. But we're all meant to do pieces of the business that we accelerate it. You know what I mean? And
oh yeah, and we find the right partners to kind of fill gaps, and that's how we get to where we need to go.
absolutely. So I'm glad to actually hear this though, because some of the things you're saying, I'm like, okay, no, I've heard this before. I get it. So I'm going to give myself some points there.
High five.
High five. Okay. So why did you decide to start your own business?
Well, I think two key points, and I think for anyone beyond my two answers, I'll get into quickly. Entrepreneurship isn't the easy route. And so I don't think most folks should say like, oh, I've romanticized this thing. I've seen, entrepreneurs in the media on film, and, I want to do that. Don't go down the path unless your inner self is really telling you this is your path. So I would start there. But for me, the two more specific areas, number one is there's just a different game you get to play that I really get energized around entrepreneurship. And there's this great photo. I think it was like an internet meme that I saw years ago. And it was a snow-filled office parking lot. And in the first parking space, there was, like a nice car, a Prius or something there. And then next to it, it said there was, maybe a slightly nicer car, some Lexus. And then, next to that, there was like some Porsche. And then there was an empty space. But the punchline of the meme was, the first one, it said, individual contributor. And then the next one, it said manager. And then in the next one, it said CEO, right? And so they all had kind of progressive, nicer cars, necessarily a great way to track our success, but that was the punchline. But what was interesting is in the empty space, it said owner. And they weren't there, right? And there's something not about being kind of the absentee owner, but the fact that the owner's somewhere. They're out in the world exploring. They're out figuring out different ways to grow. They're out, reading new things to craft and evolve the vision. There's all sorts of things that you get to do. And so, we talk a lot about in kind of the corporate world, climbing the corporate ladder. And for me, entrepreneurship is really fascinating because it's just a totally different ladder. Like it's not trying to break through that piece. It's a totally different, kind of space. And so that's the first big one. And then the second one is quite simple. I love to put myself in positions where I can move without permission.
Yes, I was actually going to go into that because, and that was one of the questions I wrote down on your website. I was reviewing your company values, right? And on here, it says move without permission. And I was like, okay, I could get on that. So I'd love to hear exactly what your thought process is behind that, because it just sounds powerful.
Well, a lot of what I've done in the past in corporate world, whether it was software or games or other types of entertainment products, a lot of it has to do with understanding our behavior on both an individual and organizational level. And there's a discipline called behavioral economics, and it's one of those classes that you take sometimes in school, and I'm like, okay, I got to take this. And it turned out to be like this really great class. Of the three classes that I took that were surprisingly valuable to me, number one was supply chain. Just helped me really understand how hard it is to move physical things around. Number two was organizational behavior and design, and how do you think about designing an organization? And then number three was behavioral economics. And on that third, I actually invested pretty heavily after my kind of academic education to really understand that space more deeply. And at its most basic, it's just the study of how we make decisions with our time and our money. And if you understand that, you can make products that can solve people's problems, kind of feed into their desires. And there's all sorts of great things there. But what I found when I actually started to kind of put this in practice is so many things I wanted to do, I had to go through gatekeepers. I had to go through some approval process. I had to wait my turn. There are all these things. I was like, this is frustrating. Just to give you, a more tangible example, years ago, I started to invest in independent filmmaking. And I really love the idea of showing up with capital and using some of my skills of bringing disparate disciplines from creatives to business people all together to deliver on a project. And so what I love about that is all the dynamic personalities and disciplines you get to work with. What I don't like about that is when you make a film, you now have to go find a place to show this. And typically that means going to a distributor or a streaming partner. And it's just a really interesting way to think that, all right, you can do all this great work, but now someone who maybe doesn't understand your journey, they don't understand, all the ways you might connect with an audience, they are the person who's going to say yes or no to how you proceed. And you can see that pattern, not just in that example, but, there are many folks who are in certain career paths and they're kind of stuck because, whether it's they have a good or bad manager, or they're in a organizational design that doesn't have the growth opportunity, or they're in an industry that's not growing. And frankly, that's just not the justification to get that promotion. I just didn't like the idea that someone else had to give me permission for me to move forward. And so that thread to me has been a really key part of my journey. I have this personal charter that is 6 words, 3 sentences. And I use it to help me make decisions, right? Because we're like inundated with decisions all day. And if you can have like a little rubric to help you like quickly make the decisions, I feel like it just reduces your stress. It just makes your day a lot easier. But mine is very simple. The first one is know thyself. I got to know who LaSean is and make sure I don't do things that are not true to my values. Number 2, I have to make things. And so I'm not the type of person who just wants to manage a bunch of people. I want to be in the making, which means almost by design, I'm going to be part of either earlier stage products or smaller things. And then number 3, I want to stay free. And part of that move without permission is how I live up to that. And whatever, someone's list may be, I believe we all need this type of constitution, and it needs to be as short as possible so you can remember it. And when you get presented with an opportunity, it might be good, but maybe it's not good for you. And so that's why that value is so critical and why it made the cut.
I think that's amazing. Wow. I learned a lot just in that few minutes. My master's degree my thesis was on organizational behavior. So.
Yeah. So you know all about it.
I do.
I was very green to the space. And so I was like, what is this? And I was like, oh, this is actually...
Makes sense. It's very important. Yeah.
It's critical. Well, humans, I like to say, we've heard the term, there's all these office politics. I like to rephrase it as the more humans you put together, the more friction you create. And it's because we show up with different values, different incentives, and you have to kind of get everybody kind of coalesced and kind of anchored on the same vision. But even really simple things. I was managing this team a while back, and I had 2 one-on-ones, and both of these 2 people are having issues with each other. And so before I went and sorted it out, I was like, I'm going to go talk to, it was so bad that we knew that these 2 folks had issues with each other. And so I was like, in our next one-on-ones, I'm going to go try to get to the bottom of this. And, the short version was one person was really frustrated because they thought, their coworker wasn't giving it enough, right? They're like, we're not going to win and they're always trying to go home early and, basically saying they're lazy without saying that word. And then the other person was saying, this person is not setting us up for long-term success because they're going to burn out the team. And we're not going to be able to kind of be here for the long haul. And what I found was really interesting when I got to the bottom of it. One person had a ton of experience and they knew kind of how to move, kind of in the corporate space. They understood the timelines and they had kids and they're like, listen, for me to show up in a healthy way, I'm going to go leave at 5 or 6 o'clock and I'm going to see you tomorrow and I'm going to turn this thing off. And then the other person was, single all the time in the world. And they were just like deeply, deeply vested into this problem. And they had decided this is where they're going to spend all of their time. And they were letting their personal values and the way they wanted to work kind of seep into kind of the prioritization they wanted everybody else to show. And so, it's not necessarily saying you have to get everybody to agree with our different incentives and motivations, but it's to get us to acknowledge them, number 1. And then number 2, say we can still be in service of a shared vision and mission, even though we might show up with different ways. And that, the unlock for that particular problem was just better communication, acknowledging both sides, and then kind of figuring out a different division of labor for how we would sort out the work. A lot of times I think it comes down to we're in this situation where the more of those humans you add together, the more friction you're creating, because now you have all of these different people who want different things out of, why they're showing up on that particular role. And I think if you are a great leader, whether you're managing a tiny team or a large team, You have to create systems to navigate all that. You can't brute force it and talk your way through it with everyone. You just won't have the time.
I think if you start from a place of love and kindness, things kind of just fall into place. And that's where I come from. I truly believe that great businesses are started with kindness, and through the rest of their existence, that the kindness has a big role to play. And so you have to find a way to manage that big group of people with all of their different identities and all their different needs and all their different wants, and try to make them all still equal. And just managing that is a challenge no matter what. So you need systems in place. You need rules. You need those in place in order to make
process.
You need a process, exactly.
Yeah.
But I think if you create the process out of kindness for the people you're creating it for, you better understand your employees. Thus, they will be happier. Thus, your business is healthier.
100%. And, I'll say one maybe contrarian point to that is that I do believe that you have to stand for something, and it's okay if there's certain people who don't want to work for your company based upon what you stand for. But I think the rule there is you need to say that up front, right? Yes. As we see a ton of the kind of whiplash that has happened in office work, remote work, hybrid work, I actually 100% support, CEOs and folks who say, no, we're going to be an in-office team. All good. What I don't agree with is folks who are like flip-flopping. We told you it was going to be hybrid. Now you got to come back. Like, it's just, it's just a strange kind of dynamic. And I had a person, we're also talking about different kind of incentives and motivations. Demographic also impacts, right? So managing a team of Gen Xers versus a team of Gen Z folks, it's very different, right? I had someone, and he was a very nice guy. And what he wanted, he said, LaSean, he was somebody I managed was his manager, and he had a skip level, and he was meeting with me, and he was frustrated. And he said because his manager wouldn't let him have a 2 to 2.5 hour lunch break. And he was like, I'm still making up the time. I was like, I understand. I think that the situation is there's some meetings that folks want you in, and let's just kind of figure out that, that dynamic. But I was like, but tell me more, why is this part of the day so critical? He's like, oh, well, I have a dog at home and I need to go home and walk my dog. And generationally, my brain just can't process that. But at the same time, this is part of his value stack, right? Mm-hmm. And so I look at it as, a company can't potentially accommodate every single set of motivations and values. But I do think the responsibility of the leaders of any company, and as an entrepreneur, it's kind of your mission to kind of set the kind of the standards to say, this is what we expect. These are our values. These are how we show up, and then really live up to those. So people who are going to be turned off by those values can opt out before they even show up.
I think maybe that's why I am a business owner, because I don't think I've ever worked for anybody, and I've been working since I was 14, that had values as such that were told up front, I am sharing my mission, my values. This is who we are, and this is who we want you or need you to be if you're going to be part of our team. Making that clear up front. And one of the things you said is, when you flip-flop, we don't like that. Do you think that it creates a loss of trust? Yeah.
So to your point, I've been fortunate to actually work on some teams that have done that, but there are at least 2 other buckets that I've also experienced. Another is where all trust is out the window. It's just an unreasonable environment, and it just won't work, period. But I've also worked in this middle stage where there are stated values, and back in the old days when we were in the office, there would be these culture posters and all these little pretty things where there'd be a cute phrase, and there'd be somebody posing on a poster and all these things. But the company didn't actually live up to whatever those specific words were. So they were gaslighting. So they would say all these things, but when crunch time came, they didn't live up to it. When stress was introduced to the system, they didn't live up to it. And so I almost feel like that middle phase or stage can be almost as dangerous, because you're stating it, but you're not living up to it. And so, and it's hard. And the way I look at cultural values, whether you have, you're a solopreneur, you have, maybe a small team of 10 people, or you're running a big company, your value should be the list of things you're willing to go out of business to protect.
Ooh, They're going to have to make a TikTok out of that.
But that's it, right? If you don't feel the value is important enough where that is the consequence, it's probably not one of your core values. You may still agree with it and try to aspire to it, but it's probably not a core value.
So is that why you have these core values literally on your website? Like,
yes.
I mean, it's beautiful. I'm looking at it right now, and automate everything. Love. First off, you should be able to live your life by design so that you can enjoy tomorrow. So I'm totally on that one. Be remarkable. Like, I was just reading that. I'm like, I have never seen or heard a business who says, we want you to be remarkable. So, I mean, why do you include that as part of it?
Well, there's two parts of that word. I mean, I love etymology. My dad was a Scrabble player. And so we were always like trying to like, well, what is that word? Let's look it up in the dictionary. And so even as a kid, I was always kind of fascinated by the meanings of words. But what I love about that word remarkable is that, number one, we know it means kind of implicitly some sense of excellence, right? But the other part that we don't acknowledge is it also means to be unique, right? Something is remarkable when it is worthy of remarking, right? And sometimes we try to bring the version of ourselves that we think our manager or our company wants to see, our customer wants to see, our investor wants to see, our peers want to see. And if you are truly being remarkable, you're both pushing yourself to be the best version of yourself, but you're also being yourself and not trying to move or migrate yourself into what you think the world wants. And when you do that and you give folks the psychological safety to show up as themselves, then they do have the potential to become the best versions of themselves. And I believe when you bring that environment together, even if you have a small team, they can do amazing things.
Wow. Like I just got the chills, man. This is awesome. I believe we need to celebrate our wins, right? And even celebrate our losses because we can learn and move forward. But celebrate courage, I've never heard. And I'm reading this and I'm like, man, this guy gets me. I know that I'm totally going off script here, but I'm more interested in what you have to say with all this.
Well, the courage one, the reason I love that one, and to be clear, I've worked with consulting companies in the past that will come into a team or into a new business and help you craft values. And on the high end, these consultants are very expensive. I was working in a big company and we paid around $250,000 to go do this exercise. And, writing these words is not the hard part. Why were they spending so much money? It's because they had to roam around and get all this consensus through all of these teams. And that was really the hard part. But going through that, I saw the framework of how they were kind of facilitating, paring down the list. I was like, that's the magic. And so I said, when I start my own company, I'm going to do my own exercise. Many times folks want a short list because it's the easy way. I have a fairly long list of values because they start to compete against each other. And sometimes you'll have something that, looks like automate everything. But if you're really customer focused or you're looking at something that is going to like not lose the humanity of it, like it's going to create tension. And the goal is to create that tension. But the reason courage is on that longer list is many times we move in fear. And as companies get larger, teams get more successful, many times the inertia is the better place to go. I had a friend who worked at Coca-Cola on the Sprite brand, and he was so excited to, work on Sprite. And when he got there, they basically said, listen, don't break Sprite. So he couldn't really do much because the market share of losing X number of cans on a shelf in a grocery store was like a big deal. Another thing we see, I used to call them the no police when I worked in corporate. And I said it, it's a bit pejorative, but kind of more of a term endearment. When I would talk to the lawyers in our legal team, I would talk to HR on what stats they could share. When I would talk to accounting on when we should pay somebody or not. So many times I would say, well, I want to do this. And I was typically, the general manager or the leader of the team. Then I'd have these support folks who would be the advisors. And some lawyer would say, well, LaSean, we can't do that. And I would always hear no, no, no. And what I evolved to understand is I started asking the question and I would ask, all right, how much risk is involved in this particular decision? And once I kind of put it on a spectrum, then we shifted from like, no, you can't do that, to you probably shouldn't do that. Right. And here are the reasons why. And then I could make a more informed decision on whether I would still do it. Right. Because I mean, there were times where someone would say, LaSean, you can't sign this contract. And I'm like, can't I? Like I'm an officer of the company. I think I can sign this. Now you want to listen to your advisors, but it was just so ridiculous. It's like, why is this person always telling me no? And what I found is many times folks were like incentivized to really just support the status quo because there was no courage. They were driven by fear. And so there's a balance. You can't be reckless doing silly things, but at some point you have to move with courage. And the reason I love that word so much is I pride myself as a person who's pretty smart and I value intelligence. And I had to acknowledge like this huge gap in my personality early in my career, where I was pretending the smart people, the intelligence was the most important. And I actually don't believe that. I think the courage is most important. And you can see it time and time again. Entrepreneurs who are the most courageous and can go out there with a clear vision and say, maybe this is a little crazy, but I'm going to go do this. Those are the folks who win the most often. And the really smart people who are timid and moving in fear, they typically don't win. And so again, there's always exceptions to both sides, but this is why this is an extremely important value to me, that the more we can tackle our internal fears, the more of the shackles we remove from ourselves and our self-limiting beliefs.
It's interesting that some of these come up because another thing I read on your website is courage trumps intellect.
Yeah.
So you kind of just went full circle right there. So is that back to what you were saying in regards to, having that courage to make those decisions? But I'm not getting the intellect part. I mean, it sounds really cool, but how does courage completely trump the smarts?
Yeah, well, I think the key takeaway is not that, being smart is not important. It's to remind smart people that that's not going to be the key for them to win, right? And I think that's the real unlock, right? Like you need to remind yourself being smart isn't enough.
Okay. That is awesome. All right. And you say make things. You've got to make things. So you like to be like hands-on and really kind of, build the idea or the brand and then move on to something else? Or do you like to stay and keep your hands in it, until it's done?
Yeah. So there's a book from Peter Thiel called 0 to 1, and it talks about building products and industries that are very early and nascent. And it's like, it's the stage where you just get started. There's a metaphor around this that says, some people climb the mountain, some people protect the mountain, other people go and find new mountains. And I'm in the latter group. That's all I'm about. And the reason I get energized about that is I love a great puzzle. And when I see an opportunity, I want to figure out how do we kind of fit this all together. But then once we kind of understand the pieces, to make that a real business, a sustainable business, now you have to go in kind of operational excellence mode and you just got to operate this thing. And so I found that I'm a much better kind of starter and recruiter of talent, like finding great operators, than I am an actual operator. And so for me, the further I get away from making things, the worse. I mean, probably the worst jobs I've had is when, I've been people manager of a large organization and I'm spending most of my time in meetings getting updates. And, someone 2-3 levels down the organization is like sharing some great, progress report. I'm like, I want to go spend the rest of my day talking to this person. And instead, I'm like, their manager's manager is like presenting me with some document. And I'm like, oh, this is not giving me good energy. And so for some people, like I have peers who love that. Right. And so I don't look at these things and say, I demonize that. That's not good. It's back to the know thyself. Right. And so for me, making things is critical. I don't look at that as like everyone should make things.
And then all the way back to know thyself, like that, when you were talking, like he really does know who he is and where he wants to be. It's like part of your DNA. I mean, that's
how we stay happy, right? I talked about behavioral economics. It's kind of a cousin to psychology, and happiness has been studied by many psychologists. One common version you might have heard is happiness is kind of the difference or the subtraction of what you perceive or what you want and what you perceive. So you say, I want X, minus what I perceive I got. And the result, if that's a negative number, I'm not happy. If it's a positive number, I am happy. That's an interesting way to look at it. There's another study that looks at meaningful purpose and other types of things where it's like, if in the moment you are happy, that's different than remembered happiness. There's this really interesting concept on remembered happiness. So if you talk to parents with a newborn in the moment, they're probably not super happy, right? Like their baby's always crying. They don't get sleep. Like everything is just like they need somebody to vent to because their life is in disarray. But if you talk to them 10 years later, they'll romanticize and tell you about all the great moments about that period in their life. And so there's this concept or this duality of experienced happiness, like where you feel happy in the moment, and remembered happiness. And so all of these things are, there's a lot of books behind me. I read a lot to figure out like what's the most simple version of a rule that LaSean can use, because I don't want it complex, that can make sure I stay happy. And one of the things I've tried to force myself to prioritize is I want a decent chunk of experienced happiness every day. Like I don't want to wait to remember the happiness later. I want it today. And so I've tried to design my professional life to give me as much of that as possible. And I'm a big believer of skill stacking. That's the idea that you're more valuable as you combine your various skills on top of each other. And if you really invest in your skill stack and you network properly, and so people know that you exist, then you will have the opportunity to live the life that you design. But if you don't develop the skill stack, you don't let anybody know that this is what makes you unique, then you might feel trapped. You might feel stuck. You might have an idea you can't execute, a job you can't quit. Like all of these things can make you feel like you can't get out. And I think a huge unlock here is, again, kind of figuring out your constitution so you know what to say no to.
This is just impressive. So through all of this, through your work at some very reputable companies, so I have no doubt that you learned a lot while you were there. Can you share an example of like a really challenging situation that you faced as an entrepreneur, since
Sure.
you moved? And then, how did you resolve that?
A lot of these examples I use are contrasting my entrepreneurial journey with my work in corporate. Mm-hmm. And one of the things in corporate that's a cheat that I had to acknowledge is you can get away with a lot of things in a big company where you don't actually deliver. You can make a great PowerPoint, give a great, write a great document, but the machine will clean it all up, right? And everybody gets to high five and clap. But when you're an entrepreneur and you're on the hook, it's you. If it works, it's you. If it doesn't work, it's you. And you just have to be okay with that. And so, as I said, I've had many experiences, big companies, little companies. I'm also ex-military. Like I've been all over the place, right? I started my first 4 years of my career in the military. That helped me with some of my systems-based thinking. So that was helpful for me. But along the way, one of the things I did was I started a salad business. So this is not just retail. This is food and beverage with a high degree of spoilage. This is like the worst company you could start, right? And in my mind, I was like, all right, I'm going to go in this neighborhood it was kind of being repositioned and all the cool, hip, food places were kind of popping in. And I said, I'm going to have an amazing brand development. It's going to be beautifully designed. The customer experience is going to be great. I'm going to use technology to make sure, checkout and all the apps are like, I did it all, right? And from my idea, in my presentations, in my business plan, to kind of getting people to commit and partner with me, like everything was fantastic. Like even to this day, I look at it, it's like, this is a pretty good plan. But when we actually got to the thick of it, it was so hard to run that company as a single location, because we just didn't have the critical mass to manage all these things like spoilage and, kind of labor calibration, training people. We were doing some unique things like, all the salad dressings were made in-house. And so you had to kind of, people had to go on a kind of a full day training to go learn all of the kind of menu items. And so there were all these kind of standard operating procedures that hadn't baked, that, weren't there. And as we said earlier, LaSean's not an operator. And so quickly there were these things where my ideas kept piling up, and there was like, these are so great, But then there was like this, pile of laundry I wasn't doing, which was all of my operational debt. And it was just getting worse and worse and worse. And eventually I was like, LaSean, you're not winning at this. And one of my proudest moments is I have a Yelp screenshot that I took on my laptop, and it has the name of my company, Fine Salads, and it says permanently closed underneath it. And I just love the experience because all of those lessons got baked into kind of this like kind of compact period of my life. And, kind of what I learned on the challenge was to, again, go in eyes wide open. And the two things I would have done differently, number one, back to the know thyself, I would have brought in a more seasoned operator, and that would have helped out. But the other thing is I didn't do enough customer development up front. And I think that's one of the biggest gaps that, individuals do when they're starting a business. They have an idea of a product or service. They want to get to building it. They get to delivering it, but they don't start selling it to say, what is the willingness to pay? How often will someone pay? What's their ability to pay? Some people want your product, but you're selling to someone who doesn't have the money. And so much of that customer development work can be front loaded. And you actually should do, I believe, more of that before you actually start selling. Like I might have just gone in that neighborhood and taken out billboards and say, text for a free coupon for a free salad, and never had a salad company open yet, right? And just go test the demand, right? Like that would have maybe been a $3,000 to $5,000 investment for me to go test the demand. And then I could turn all those folks, into early customers and like invite them to the opening. Like, thanks for your early interest. I want to give you, a week's free, set of salads. Like there's all sorts of things I could have done if I was like, let me start with the customer and work toward the solution instead of starting with a solution and then searching for my customer.
LaSean, I love your brain. I could talk to you forever. Oh my goodness. Did you live in Arizona? Do you live in Arizona?
Yeah, I currently live in Seattle, but I lived in Arizona for quite a bit. I went to Tempe High School, for folks who know the area. Go Buffaloes. And are you one of those Corona people or someplace?
No, I was a Mountain View Trojan.
Okay, there we go.
Answers are right there.
Yeah. I spent a decent amount of time in my childhood there, and I went back a couple different times as I was moving around. And so I have a big base of folks still there. But one of the things that I love about, certain places, I think the Phoenix area is one, as I've learned more about other areas like Columbus, Ohio is another area where you get a good mix of different types of people. And so your brain gets to kind of figure out, oh, this is what all these different points of view looks like. And I think it can be helpful as a business owner to have exposure to kind of different types of people because you're going to have different types of customers, you're going to have different types of employees, and it's very important to kind of expand your mind.
Immerse yourself in that. And Arizona is a great place to do it. I lived there for a long time, and then I moved out to very cold, frigid, wonderful, beautiful town that has less people than a neighborhood. So in Arizona. And then you were talking about 0 to 1. You were talking about mountain. And it was before I was talking with you, I literally did like a 4-minute meditation where I was grounding myself, and my vision, of what I am, of who I am, was a mountain. Like that's where it was.
I love it.
And then you talk about, understanding what your path is, making your path clear. This morning on my board, typically I write something that inspires me every day or just kind of makes me feel like I have something to strive for. Today it says, my path is clear. So there's a lot of synchronicity here. And
look at us. We're just crossing over right at the same time.
And I'm telling you, there's something great here. And I think it's because, great minds, that's what it is. It's just
high five.
Great mind. Yes. All right. Well, let's get a few more things out of you. Actually, I think you've answered a lot of my fun questions. Who do you think is the most innovative entrepreneur, either previous or now, who has impacted you in some way or another, or helped you grow, or helped you learn, or that you just are inspired by?
Well, I think a couple things there. I've been asked the question, a different related question on like if I could interview someone, or I could have dinner with someone, like who would it be? And when I was in business school, at an opportunity where they invited the club presidents to meet Warren Buffett for breakfast before a big speech he was going to do, right? And like it was a huge honor. And I mean, it was a decent sized group. It wasn't like just three of us, right? So it wasn't like super cozy, but it was like, oh my goodness, we're in a room having breakfast with Warren Buffett, right? And like, it was pretty amazing. And what I took away from that was like, it was pretty fantastic, but I really left like, man, I could be this guy. Not that I can be Warren Buffett and I could have the same success as Warren Buffett or any of those things, but the idea that there's some special pixie dust that has to be sprinkled on you before you can win, like it was really great to have that moment, because what I left with was, okay, what I want from these folks is their learnings. And I've since evolved to a more actionable point of view there, which is, you know, all these great people that have all this great experience, to the extent that at some point they take their 20, 30 years of experience and they go put it into a book, that means for the price of $20 and maybe 8 hours of your reading time, you can go get all of this condensed information in your brain. And I just love the idea, like that's the most affordable coaching you can buy. And so that's when I think about who inspires me. It's like there's a litany of folks who have done different things. I'm a big Peter Drucker fan. You know, he talks about the purpose of business is to create and keep a customer. And I love the idea of like that's it. Everything else is noise. Like your job is to create that customer and keep that customer. So folks who have tried to give us a framework on how to think about business is a huge list, including Peter. And then more specifically to your question, after I give you that long-winded sidebar, the, you know, folks who have found success bootstrapping their businesses, I just love those stories because they not only move without permission, but they won big. You know, there's folks like Marcus Persson who started Mojang, and that was the company that created Minecraft. And they ended up selling for, I think, $2 billion and some change. But what's fascinating, you know, typically when you have an exit of that size, the CEO or the founders are, you know, many times in the single digits. Sometimes they're, you know, 1% to 3% ownership. And he was, you know, somewhere in the, I think, 60 to 80%. Like it was a massive ownership stake he still had because he had not been diluted from raising a bunch of capital from outside investors. And he also had the decision, like, I can sell this company when I want. I can not sell it. There's no pressure for how he had to do it. And we've seen other examples of this, the founder of Spanx, the founder of MailChimp, where they have bootstrapped their company for a very long time and kind of balanced this moving with permission with kind of great financial outcome. And so those are some of the folks that have inspired me most.
That is impressive. Most unique answers we've received so far. Okay, give me that author again.
The author of which one?
The one that you were just talking about, everything else is noise, is the only note.
Oh, Peter Drucker. So yeah, Peter Drucker, he was more of a consultant, but he did write some books, and there's some great summaries of his work. Now, this was back in the day. I love these books from like the 50s and the 60s. People are like, oh my goodness, that's so old. I look at it differently. I'm like, that's so old that it stood the test of time. We know if it's good or not, right? And so, you know, there's going to be, you know, dozens, maybe hundreds of business books published this month, but we don't know if they're good. They might sound great, right? Like I'm a fan of Simon Sinek, and he, you know, will like kind of start with why, but we don't know how many of his ideas will be durable until we give it more cycle time. And I actually met him one time at Microsoft back in his early days when he was doing like 12 person coaching sessions. They brought him in, and I was like, this guy like has a point of view, but I don't know if he's going to be a Peter Drucker. Right. And so we know Peter is that because of how long his ideas have been kind of attacked, inspected, and they've stood the test of time. But those types of folks like Drucker, I think are really interesting because they give us a foundation. And whether you work in agriculture, consumer goods, professional services, like wherever you work, you can use these fundamentals and then you can kind of tune it to your discipline, domain, or area of expertise.
Well, this has been a phenomenal conversation, and I really, really do hope that we get to chat again because I have no doubt you have so much more to share.
Oh, this was fun.
This was fun. So why don't you tell us what Kager is? What do you do, and how do they get a hold of you?
Yeah, so Kager is an investment company. We invest in businesses. We also fund new businesses that are focused on helping people automate their customer development. And what all of that means is when you have your next great entrepreneurship idea, you don't know if it's good. And how do you know if it's good? If people start signing up, people start giving you money, like you need real data to know if your idea is good. And so I invest in businesses, largely software companies that help people accelerate getting to that piece of data. And so that's the whole piece. As far as where folks can find me, The group email is grow@cagr.com. If you want to have a more casual conversation with me, I'm on Twitter at LaSean.
Awesome. We'll make sure that all of those, links are dropped down in the show notes. But again, LaSean, it has been a pleasure. I am really grateful that you've joined us today, and I look forward to future conversations for sure.
Love the shared energy, and it sounds like we're on a shared path. So have a fantastic week. All righty, take care.
Wow, what a great episode. I hope you had as much fun as I did. If you want more of this goodness, make sure you subscribe so that you get notifications for future podcasts. And if you found value from this, please share it with others. You can visit our website at cwgdigital.com. This is Erica Bailey. I am your host, and I will see you next time.